Welcome to this deep dive. We've got quite a collection of studies with us today, all kind of pointing towards something really fundamental.
Mm,
It's about the connection between how we, push ourselves to achieve things and those sort of undercurrents of anxiety or even depression we might feel, that internal pressure.
exactly, yeah. And we're looking at a real bird's eye view here, thanks to something called a meta-analysis.
Right.
Think of it like a detective looking at clues from lots of different cases, trying to find the common threads.
Okay.
So here, the cases are individual studies, and the thread is how these different ways we approach achievement link up with feeling anxious or depressed. It's a pretty powerful way to spot the real signals.
Definitely cuts through the noise.
Hmm.
So what were these different approaches or ways they looked at? It comes down to something called achievement goals, right?
That's the term, yeah.
Sounds maybe a bit academic, but it's really just about what motivates us when we're trying to get good at something. Is it about our own progress or beating the competition? Uh-huh. Or maybe are we aiming for success or just trying hard not to fail?
Right. And there are different ways researchers map this out, but the one that's like central here is the 2 by 2 model.
Yeah, the 2 by 2 model. It really gives us a much richer picture than some of the older ones. It basically looks at two key questions.
Okay.
First, when you think about doing well, what does that mean to you? Is it mastering the task, really growing your skills? That's mastery. Or is it about performing better than others, standing out? That's performance.
Mastery versus performance. Got it.
Right.
And the second question.
The second is about your underlying drive. Are you striving towards achieving that competence? Or are you driven more by a fear of not being competent? That's the approach versus avoidance distinction.
Okay. So approach is going for it. Avoidance is trying not to mess up, basically.
You've got it. Put those two dimensions together, master performance and approach avoidance, and you get four distinct ways people tend to approach achievement.
Okay, let's break those down. First up, mastery approach. What's the core idea there? So mastery approach, that's when you're really fueled by wanting to learn, to improve, to genuinely get a handle on something based on your own internal standards.
So the satisfaction comes from the progress itself.
Exactly. From understanding something new or, conquering a challenge because you know you've grown, not because someone else noticed.
Makes perfect sense. It's about the journey, yeah, getting better. Okay, then what about performance approach? That sounds like the classic competitive path.
Precisely. With performance approach, the focus shifts outward. It's about outperforming others, demonstrating your abilities compared to everyone else. It's about, well, winning, being seen as the best or at least better than average.
Okay. Right, now let's flip to the other side, the avoidance goals. First is mastery avoidance. This one always feels a bit counterintuitive to me. What's driving that?
It is a bit nuanced, yeah. Mastery avoidance is about trying to avoid not learning or maybe losing skills you already have.
Oh,
So the fear is about regression, maybe not living up to your own past standards or just seeing your abilities decline. It's not really about comparing yourself to others. It's an internal benchmark you're afraid of falling short of.
interesting. So, like a musician practicing hard just to stay sharp, not necessarily to learn a whole new piece?
Kind of like that, yeah. Or an expert trying not to forget important knowledge. And finally, performance avoidance. This one just sounds stressful. You're probably right about that. Performance avoidance is all about trying to avoid doing worse than others. The main concern is not looking incompetent.
Yikes.
Yeah, not being seen as a failure compared to the people around you. It's that fear of negative social comparison that's the key driver.
Okay, so we've got the four types laid out. Mastery approach, mastery avoidance, and performance avoidance. Now for the big reveal from this meta-analysis, how did these different ways of striving actually link up with anxiety and depression? What were the main findings?
Okay, so let's look at the overall picture first. For mastery approach goals that focus on personal growth, learning for its own sake, the findings were really quite encouraging.
Good news.
Seems like it. They found a significant negative relationship with both anxiety and depression. So higher mastery approach, lower anxiety and depression.
Wow. And did they give numbers like effect sizes?
They did. To give you a sense, the correlation was Medico zero point 0 for anxiety and Medico 0.18 for depression, both statistically significant.
Okay, so negative relationship. Focusing on getting better for yourself seems like it might act as a kind of buffer against feeling anxious or down.
Mhm.
That's a pretty powerful takeaway already.
It really is. Now, let's look at performance approach, the drive to be the best, to outperform others. Here, the picture gets, well, a bit more complicated.
How so?
They found a significant positive relationship with anxiety. The DAR value was 0.15. So more performance approach, more anxiety.
Ah, So striving to win might fuel worry. That makes intuitive sense, actually. What about depression?
Well, the link with depression was also positive, but it didn't quite reach statistical significance in the overall analysis. It was R equals zero point zero 0.05. So a trend, maybe, but not a strong, clear link across all the studies combined.
Okay, so wanting to be top dog might primarily cost you in terms of anxiety, but the depression link is maybe weaker or less consistent. Got it. What about the avoidance goals, the ones driven by fear?
Right. So for mastery avoidance that worry about losing skills or not learning the meta-analysis, interestingly, didn't find significant links with either anxiety or depression overall.
Really? No significant link.
Nope. The R for anxiety was zero point zero 0.08, non-significant. And for depression, it was actually slightly negative, R equals zero point 0.13, but also non-significant.
That's surprising, maybe. You'd think worrying about losing ground would link to anxiety.
You might think so, but in this large analysis, that internal pressure to maintain your own standards didn't show a strong general connection to anxiety or depression. We can circle back to why that might be later.
Okay. And finally, performance avoidance. That fear of looking worse than others. This one feels like it should have red flags everywhere.
Absolutely, and the data backs that up.
Mm-hmm.
This is where the connections were strongest and, frankly, most concerning.
Okay.
They found a significant positive relationship with both anxiety and depression. For anxiety, R equals zero point 0.25, and for depression, R equals zero point 0.1. Both clearly significant.
Wow. 0.25 for anxiety. That's a noticeable link.
It is. Essentially, the research strongly suggests that the more you're driven by that fear of failing compared to others, the more vulnerable you tend to be to both anxiety and depression.
Okay, let me try to boil this down. Striving to learn and grow mastery approach seems generally good for mental well-being. Check.
Check.
Constantly trying to avoid looking bad compared to others, performance avoidance looks pretty detrimental. Double check.
Definitely.
Wanting to be better than everyone else, performance approach seems mainly to crank up the anxiety dial.
That's the main link, yes.
And mastery avoidance, worrying about losing your edge. Well, the jury's still out based on this big picture view.
That's a fair summary of the overall findings, yeah. But of course, the next big question is why? Why do these connections exist? What's going on underneath?
Exactly. We see the correlations, but what's the engine driving them? Is it the goals causing the feelings, or the feelings shaping the goals, or something else?
Great questions. One really influential idea here is the goal orientation model of depression vulnerability. It was developed by Dykman back in '98.
Okay.
And the central idea is basically that the type of achievement goals we tend to embrace shapes how we think about ourselves, how we interpret things that happen, and ultimately how vulnerable we are to stuff like depression and anxiety.
All right, so how does focusing on mastery differ from focusing on performance in this model when it comes to our inner state?
Well, the argument goes that mastery goals tend to foster what Carol Dweck later popularized as a growth mindset.
Right, the idea that abilities can be developed.
Exactly. You see challenges not as threats, but as opportunities to learn. Crucially, your sense of self-worth isn't really tied up in specific outcomes or how you rank against others.
Okay.
This tends to build resilience. It creates a stronger buffer against depression and anxiety, because if you stumble, if you make a mistake, well, it's just part of the learning process, right?
Yeah.
It's not some fundamental judgment on your worth as a person.
That makes total sense. If mistakes are data points for improvement, not verdicts on your value, they're way less likely to knock you down emotionally.
Precisely. Now, contrast that with performance goals. Because they're so focused on social comparison, on demonstrating superiority, they can lead to a much more fragile sense of self-worth.
How so?
Because your value becomes contingent on external validation on winning, on being seen as better than others. So when you hit difficulties or setbacks or you don't outperform, it can be easily interpreted as a sign of personal inadequacy. I failed, therefore I am a failure. This can lead to lower resilience and just generally a greater susceptibility to both depression and anxiety.
So it's about where your self-worth is anchored, rooted in your own progress. You're on sort of solid ground. Dependent on constantly measuring up externally, it gets precarious.
That's a great way to put it. And it's also really important to remember that this might not be a one-way street. Meaning the causality could go both ways.
Yeah.
The researchers who did this meta-analysis point this out too. Feeling anxious or depressed could, in turn, influence the kinds of achievement goals we adopt.
Ah, okay. Like if you're already feeling anxious.
Exactly. Someone struggling with anxiety might be more likely to adopt performance avoidance goals. They might think, okay, I just need to avoid any situation where I might fail or look bad because I can't handle that right now.
So it could become a bit of a cycle then. Feeling down makes you more focused on avoiding negative judgment, which then maybe reinforces the negative feelings.
It certainly seems plausible that it could create a negative feedback loop for some people. And the meta-analysis also points to a whole range of cognitive processes that might see the links here.
Like what kind of process?
Things like dysfunctional attitudes or negative attribution styles, how we explain why things happen. Also, whether we lean towards a growth versus a fixed mindset, the kinds of coping strategies we use when things get tough, how much we tend to ruminate or dwell on negative stuff, and just our overall level of perceived stress. All of these could be pathways connecting our achievement goals to how we feel.
Wow, it's a really intricate web, isn't it? Our thoughts, our motivations, our feelings, all interacting. Now, this meta-analysis didn't just stop at the broad strokes, right? They dug deeper into whether these relationships changed depending on the situation or how the studies were done. It's not always just mastery good, avoidance bad across the board.
You're absolutely right. It's more nuanced. The strength of these connections definitely seems to fluctuate depending on various factors, which the researchers called moderators.
Oh, wait.
One really interesting one was the actual achievement goal model that the original studies used.
How did that make a difference? We've been focused on the 2 by 2 model, but you mentioned there were older ones.
Yes. So they found that the relationships, the links between goals and anxiety depression tended to be stronger in studies that used the older, simpler dichotomous model.
The one that just had mastery versus performance, no approach avoidance split.
Exactly, just that basic split.
Huh. That's fascinating. Maybe that simpler distinction somehow captures a really core difference in mindset that gets a bit, I don't know, diluted in the more complex models.
That's one possibility. They also found that the trichotomous model, which splits performance into approach and avoidance, but keeps mastery as just one thing, often showed stronger links than the 2 by 2 model we've been mostly talking about.
Stronger than the 2 by 2, why might that be?
Well, the authors of the meta-analysis speculated that maybe the measures used in those trichotomous studies sometimes tapped into things like personal preferences or even specific worries related to achievement, which could make them slightly better predictors of emotional outcomes compared to the purer 2 by 2 measures.
So even the specific research tools we use matter. It shows how science is always refining things. What other factors made a difference?
They also looked at the specific achievement goal terminology, the exact words used.
Hmm.
Like when a study used the term development approach goals, which is basically a flavor of mastery approach, really emphasizing personal improvement.
Okay.
It showed an even stronger negative link with anxiety and a similar descriptive trend for depression compared to studies just using the general mastery approach label.
Interesting. So that specific focus on development might capture something particularly beneficial.
It seems plausible. And similarly, on the performance side, when studies used demonstration approach goals, which is a type of performance approach really focused on showing off your abilities to others,
Right.
they found a stronger positive link with anxiety compared to other ways of framing performance approach.
So that act of proving yourself seems especially anxiety provoking.
Hmm.
Makes sense. It brings that social evaluation right to the forefront.
Exactly. It really highlights the pressure of being judged. Another factor was the scope of the goals, whether they were general life goals or specific to a context like school or work.
Ah, right. Does it matter if it's your overall approach versus just how you tackle, say, your job?
It seems to. They found that more general mastery approach goals, like this is how you tend to approach challenges in life overall, had a stronger negative relationship with both anxiety and depression.
That makes intuitive sense, I suppose. If your whole orientation is towards growth, it probably has a wider impact than if it's just about, I don't know, learning a new software program at work.
Precisely. The researchers explain this using something called the correspondence principle.
Mm.
Basically, broad measures of achievement orientation tend to link more strongly with broad measures of mental health. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, it does. Were there other moderators?
A few others, yeah, though maybe with slightly less consistent effects across the board. The specific achievement goal scale used like the PALS or the AGQR, different questionnaires sometimes showed variations. Maybe because they emphasize slightly different things like the beating others aspect versus the looking good aspect of performance goals.
Mm.
Education level also seemed to play a role sometimes. Some relationships, like mastery approach and anxiety, or performance approach and anxiety, were actually stronger in college samples.
Huh. Maybe the pressures are different in college. More overt competition.
Could be. And finally, they touched on cultural context. This was really interesting. There seemed to be evidence for some links being universal, but others perhaps culturally specific.
Like what?
Like the performance approach going into depression seems stronger in Western cultures compared to Eastern cultures, where it wasn't as consistently linked.
Wow. That is interesting. Maybe in more collectivist cultures, that individual drive to outperform just doesn't carry the same psychological weight or negative
That's
consequences.
a very plausible interpretation. The authors suggested exactly that perhaps in Western cultures, with such a strong emphasis on individual achievement and competition, the internal pressures tied to performance approach goals hit harder on mental health.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of the nuances, but let's circle back to mastery avoidance. You said it didn't show strong links overall. Does that mean it's just neutral? Not something to worry about?
Well, not necessarily neutral, but the overall meta-analysis didn't find those significant links. True. However, the researchers did offer a potential reason for this.
Which was?
They suggested that this particular goal, that drive to avoid losing skills or avoid not learning, might actually be more relevant and perhaps more impactful for older adults.
Ah,
Whereas most of the studies they included in the analysis focused on younger people, middle school, high school, college kids.
so maybe the fear of losing skills becomes more salient as we age.
It's possible, right?
Eh,
And they also noted that there were just fewer studies overall that specifically looked at mastery avoidance compared to the other three goals. So the data pool was smaller.
gotcha. So it's possible its impact is more specific to certain life stages, and the research hasn't fully captured that yet. It
Yeah.
sounds like mastery avoidance is still a bit of an underexplored territory.
Exactly. We definitely need more research there, especially looking at different age groups, to really understand its relationship with well-being.
Now, on the flip side, one thing that did seem really clear was the consistent negative impact of performance avoidance. You mentioned it had strong positive links to both anxiety and depression across most moderators.
That's correct. That connection, the fear of doing worse than others being linked to higher anxiety and depression, held up pretty consistently, regardless of the specific achievement goal model used or the terminology or the education level in many cases.
Wow.
It really underscores how, well, detrimental this particular focus might be for our inner peace. Constantly operating from that place of fearing negative comparison just seems to take a significant psychological toll.
Yeah, it paints a really clear picture. Living in fear of not measuring up seems like a heavy burden to carry. Now, like any huge research effort, there are always limitations, right? Things the study didn't look at, or caveats. What did the authors themselves point out?
Yeah, absolutely. They highlighted several important points for context. First, the meta-analysis looked at each of the four goals kind of in isolation.
But in real life?
Exactly. In real life, people often have a mix of goals. You might be driven by learning in one area, but also want to outperform colleagues in another, or even have conflicting goals within the same activity.
That makes sense. We're rarely motivated by just one single thing.
Right. So future research could really benefit from looking at these combinations or profiles of goals and how they relate to mental health. Second, almost all the studies relied on self-report, people filling out questionnaires about their goals and their feelings.
Which raises the issue of,
Common method variance. The idea that the way people respond to surveys might create some artificial links.
Right.
If someone generally sees things negatively, they might rate both their anxiety and their avoidance goals higher.
right, even if one isn't directly causing the other, it's just their response style.
Potentially. So using different methods observations, maybe reports from others, experiments could help strengthen the findings. Third, and this is a big one, most studies were cross-sectional, just a snapshot in time.
So we see correlations, but we can't be sure about cause and effect.
Exactly. We see that certain goals go along with higher anxiety or depression, but we can't definitively say from this data alone whether the goals cause the feelings or the feelings lead to the goals, or if it's more of a back and forth loop.
Longitudinal studies following people over time would be needed for that.
Precisely. That's crucial for untangling cause and effect. And finally, the authors stress the need for more research in a few specific areas, like digging deeper into those psychological mechanisms, the how. How do these goals translate into feelings? Also, looking at specific types of anxiety and depression, not just general scores. And as we mentioned, definitely more research on mastery avoidance and understanding all of this in older adults.
Okay, so this meta-analysis gives us a really valuable big picture map, but it also clearly signposts where the next explorations need to happen. Now, let's bring this back home. For our listeners who tune in to get informed, maybe have those aha moments, what are the key takeaways here?
I think the most important message is that Your mindset, your orientation when you approach challenges and try to achieve things, it really does seem to have a tangible link to your emotional well-being.
Okay.
Focusing on your own learning, growth, skill development, that mastery approach consistently looks linked to lower anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
It seems like a positive path.
Good path.
Conversely, that persistent worry about doing worse than others, looking bad performance avoidance, seems pretty clearly associated with higher levels of both anxiety and depression, a path to be wary of.
Definitely.
The drive to simply outperform others' performance approach has that more complex picture, mainly showing that link with increased anxiety.
The anxiety cost.
Yeah. And that goal of avoiding skill loss mastery avoidance well, it still needs more digging to fully understand its role, especially across different ages.
So it's almost like the internal story we tell ourselves about why we're striving can either like nourish our well-being or subtly chip away at it.
That's a great way to think about it. And just gaining some awareness of your own tendencies, which of these goals resonate most with you? In what situations? That alone can offer really valuable insights. Insights into how you handle pressure, how you react to setbacks, and maybe how it connects to your overall emotional state.
So here's something maybe for everyone listening to mull over. When you tackle a challenge, what's really driving you? Is it that buzz from learning something new, from getting better? Is it wanting to be the best, to stand out? Is it more about the fear of not measuring up, fear of looking bad, or maybe even that subtle worry about losing skills you've worked hard for?
Yeah, reflecting on that, on your primary driver, and then thinking about how that underlying motivation might be subtly shaping how you feel day to day. It's
Yeah.
quite powerful.
And maybe if you notice a strong tendency towards, say, performance avoidance, consciously trying to shift focus, maybe towards the process, the learning, the mastery side.
Exactly. Consciously considering a shift towards more mastery-oriented goals could potentially yield real benefits for well-being, while also just being mindful of and maybe gentle with any strong performance avoidance tendencies you notice. It's not about judging, just understanding.
Absolutely. And ultimately, maybe a deeper understanding of all these connections can help us create more supportive environments everywhere, school, work, even hobbies where the focus isn't solely on external results, but also on fostering that healthy, resilient inner landscape. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.